Hello and welcome to the CFB Super Show. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuce 85, and we are brought to you by the world famous FTN Network. Now, I'm trying out some new setups, as in a new camera and a new microphone. Probably not the time to be testing new equipment, so if anything seems to be erratic, I apologize in advance. If it happens or I get knocked off, Jake will carry us through until I get by and fix it. So I just want to give you guys that heads up in advance. All right. I am going to bring Jake in here in a second, but I just want to bring up that we had ourselves a nice little week 0. Things went well for us. Chalk didn't go so well. We had ourselves a great week. Week 1 has now started. We're in the war zone here. We're dealing with some FCS games. We're dealing with some lower tier opponents, some depth chart shenanigans, some injuries already. So it's an up and down type of grind. This week is especially going to be tough. We had the slate today, which is 11 games. We have slate tomorrow, 5-6 games. Then we have 3, 4, 5 slates on Saturday. There are games on Sunday, of course, along with the NFL is coming by. But we have this Sunday CFB. And then we have the Monday games as well. And then we'll go into kind of a normal routine for a couple of weeks before action drops. So there is a ton of action coming your way. We'll be covering with articles, tracker information. There'll be Discord plays, obviously shows, everything you could possibly need to be successful. Shout out to my guy, Nick Nash, for the big time performance he dropped for us. Jake had a good week, and a lot of our subs had a good week. Let's go ahead and bring him on now. Look at that.
What's going on? Well,
it's magic. How are you, Jake?
Doing well, man. Doing well. This was
so how was your week last week? Let's start with that before.
Well, it was Nick Nash week, man. You brought that play on the show and turned me on to it, and a lot of other people as well. And it was a good week regardless. But that kind of put it over the top, and that was the icing on the cake. We did miss on PrizePicks. Unfortunately, we were one Tyron Smith from like a solid 5-figure week on PrizePicks, but we still did okay over there. But it was like it's not quite screenshot worthy, but still very, very much profitable, both on the DFS side and on the PrizePicks side. So very enjoyable start to the season, week 0. Not quite hitting Ray Davis and Vanderbilt rushing yards levels of ecstasy the way we did last year on week 0, but we'll get them this week.
Yeah, it's important to note Tylan Hines was a guy that we were both, or the whole industry was high on, and apparently he ended up having some cramping and some other stuff that affected his ability to play in the second half. So people were wondering what happened to him. That's something that unfortunately came up. And take the good with the bad. Nick Nash, it worked. I felt a good touchdown. I can't sit here and be like, I knew he was going to get 3 touchdowns. Obviously not. But take the good with the bad. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. I've got the Southern Utah receiver that I was super high on today, Wooden, and he's getting some carries, but he's not doing a whole lot else. So sometimes that happens when you have the line in the sand plays. All right, so this is going to be a dedicated to the Saturday main slate. If you guys are watching, I appreciate it. I see some comments there. We'll get around those. We'll try to cover some FanDuel stuff as well. If you guys have questions about that, please make sure you ask that. Otherwise, we're going to go in a game-by-game format. Now, I know there's a ton of games to cover, so we're going to try and go every other, and Jake's going to talk about some of the games. I'll talk about some of the games. That way we're kind of flow a little bit, because there are 14 actual games, and that is a ton to talk about. I actually did the game-by-game write-up for today's slate, which took me a long time last night. Our editor, DK, was usually calling jerk about all the words, and I can tell you it's a beast. So I will be going back to the top play style write-ups for the foreseeable future, but on the show, we'll do the break game-by-game thing. So let's dive in here. Let's get into it. We're going to start things off with the first game here, which is Boston College and NIU. Take it away, Jake.
Yeah. So this is actually one of the more reasonable from a DFS perspective matchups. I want to say it was either a 9 or a 10-point spread, at a 50-point total, which is not like by any means fantasy goodness, but it's also not a blowout where you have to start worrying about, is this guy gonna not get playing time? And sometimes, like we saw with Plumlee, JRP got there, in 3 quarters, but they kind of kept riding him and finally got out of there in the 4th. But don't always see, especially early on in the season with teams still trying to get into a rhythm, you don't see the guys leave in right at the half or first part of the 3rd quarter, the way that you might expect in blowouts. But this one is a little bit more competitive game. And there are some pieces to choose from. I do want to be kind of choosy about who we get excited about. I do want to talk about some people, but obviously there will be varying levels of excitement in each games. One guy I'm pretty excited about is Ryan O'Keefe. Obviously transfer into BC, comes from high flying passing attack at Wake, and he probably is going to be the alpha. You never really know with these transfers how it's going to shake out, how the chemistry is with a new system, a new quarterback, and all that. But definitely has the talent, and somebody's going to need to take over all the dynamic receiver work that Zay Flowers is vacating. So I think there's a decent chance that we see some explosiveness out of Ryan O'Keefe. Not particularly excited about using the quarterback from the BC side. Moorhead, I don't know. Maybe you have some thoughts on him. You think he's going to dominate in NIU offense, but it's at 7,600. There's probably other plays that we can get to at quarterback. I think we're probably going to see most of that passing work concentrated through O'Keefe anyway. But we'll see how that plays out. It's a new offense. I can't predict exactly how it's going to go. Not going to pretend that I can. As far as the NIU side, I actually am really excited about Antario Brown at 5,100. Yes, it is a MAC team going up against BC. BC, obviously they play generally at a higher level, but in terms of run defense specifically, I think that's a place where they can be taken advantage of even by a MAC team. And if we see any amount of decent volume from Antario Brown, and he held his own up against teams like Tulsa and Vanderbilt last year, and so it's not like he only dominated when it came to MAC play. And at 5,100, that's a pretty reasonable price. Not going to go to Rocky Lombardi. I think we can do better than that at quarterback, but I do have some interest, especially, price-wise, in Trayvon Rudolph. He is a huge part of their passing game when he's healthy, and he is healthy coming into this season. So if you're looking for a sneak that's, not down there in the 3K level, but 4,600, kind of right where Nick Nash was last week, not calling him a Nick Nash level play by any means. I don't think he's going to see that kind of volume, but he's definitely a guy that can get behind the defense and, break 1 or 2 long touchdowns and be kind of a game breaker on this slate. So that's probably the play that I'm most excited about from this game in terms of low ownership in particular, and maybe people that don't get super into Maction, not knowing the Trayvon Rudolph name because he didn't do anything last year and he was hurt. But I'd like to see him jump out and have a big game here at low ownership, and be able to keep NIU in the game long enough to keep this one on competitive, and maybe him and O'Keefe go trade touchdowns a couple times. That'd be great to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rudolph, I mean, he's got that continuity and experience with Rocky Lombardi, who's done pretty well in the Maction, actually. Price-wise, yeah, 7.4, not that intriguing, but he can definitely, I think, move the ball here against BC and put up some points. So I like that call for sure. And that 4.6 price range lately, DK's just, the very first 2 weeks of the season here, they're missing the boat on some of these price tags. And even a guy like, Casper Rutkowitz, I think is how we pronounce that, at the Stone Min, has a little bit of intrigue there too for GPP. So definitely agree there is something to like here about the NIU side. All right, so moving along here, we have the next game, Virginia versus Tennessee. The Virginia side, we got to see ex-Virginia quarterback Brennan Armstrong in action today, and already looking better now that he's out of that just awful system that they were running. Looking at it, it's pretty. Tennessee, they're going to be running that video game offense. Defensively, they're okay, but they're typically in shootouts. But it's not as if this Virginia team's going to come in here and put up a bunch of points and be really DFS relevant at quarterback. They've got Tony Muskett, Paris Jones, Mike Hollins, Kobe Pace, kind of a three-headed monster thing going in at running back. They do bring in a guy that I liked in Northwestern and Malik Washington to be their WR1. And then they have a couple of returners, guys like Malachi Fields, Demeek Starling. So not a lot to be excited about for this Virginia team, at least right now. So I don't have that much interest there. In the interest of time, though, and having 14 games, I don't want to try and pick a guy out of there that, maybe they'll be okay. I don't want to, mislead anyone. Pretty much not looking at the Virginia side. Maybe you have a sneak Virginia, and that would be cool if so. But definitely looking at the Vol side here. Joe Milton gets a chance to take the reins. Absolute cannon of an arm during, there's a lot of videos going around social media. Oh, my God, this guy can throw it, 70 yards down the field. He's not particularly accurate on those throws. He is somebody that I'm curious to see with more volume how that accuracy looks. And he also has, we got to see Rashada today for ASU and these young crop of quarterbacks that are coming in this class. And he has behind him there Nico Iamaleava, who is going to be an absolute star when he does take the reins. So Milton, probably not in any real danger of Nico taking his job, but he's certainly not going to be able to play mediocre, especially after what they just saw with that offense the last couple seasons with Hendon Hooker. Milton did throw for 971 yards and 10 touchdowns in the work that he did play, so obviously there is a little bit to like there. Hooker completed 70% of his passes last year, so that's going to be somewhat of a tough marker for anyone to hit, but you can't come in there and throw like 55% after that and have that kind of drop off. Although again, Milton, people say he can throw the football over the mountains there like Uncle Rico, and he certainly can. And he has the weapons at his disposal to do some really good damage if he can just get it, the football anywhere near those guys. The Tennessee running backs do come with an or tag. So you have Jamari Small with Jalen Wright, both splitting the work. That's pretty much the way it was operated last year. Small's been in this backfield for 3 seasons now, and he has, Evans a couple years ago. He's kind of been that 1B. Sometimes he's the 1A. He did rush for 700 yards and 13 touchdowns, so he has plenty of touchdown equity, but Wright rushed for 910. So you're going to see a pretty even split there with those two. And then the guy that everybody loves for the Vols, and this might be the spot here for me. Early in the slate, early in the show, I might have my line in the sand spot here. But Squirrel Light is a guy that everybody's really hyped for, and for good reason. He's really talented, right? But he does have, at least earlier in the week, an or tag next to his name with Dante Thornton. Now, I don't love Dante Thornton. He's a transfer from Oregon. He's okay. But the fact that he's, in the mix there to take snaps, and even if Squirrel White does end up being a starter, I think that we're going to see a situation where maybe he doesn't get as much work as people are really kind of earmarked for him. Brew McCoy, starting gig all alone. He's going to get a ton of work. And then I have him marked as brand favorite. Might be just be, Walt brand favorite, but Ramel Keaton, who I'm absolutely in love with, one of my favorite guys on this team. Jalen Hyatt and Seti Tillman, those guys are gone. That's a ton of production to replace. Looking at it, Brew McCoy, 52 catches, 670 yards, 4 touchdowns. Ramel Keaton, 31, 562, and 5. Solid as a WR4-5 last year. Those guys both stepping into that alpha role. And then Squirrel White, who put up good numbers, 30 catches, 481 yards, and 2 touchdowns. It just kind of worries me about that, Dante Thornton being there in that spot. And if it was the same situation with Keaton where it was an or tag or Thornton was playing his spot, then I would say the same thing. I'm a little worried about my guy, but it looks to me like McCoy is the clear top, ascending into that Seti Tillman pre-injury level. And then you'll have Keaton busting out these big plays, a la Jalen Hyatt. With Squirrel White, he'll have his games here or there, but I really am kind of focusing in on those other two. And when you look at the pricing on these guys, there's not a very hard decision to be made here. Squirrel White's actually the most expensive of the group at 5.5, which is a fine price. Playable, certainly think you can use him, but you have Brew McCoy there at 4.8, which is going to make him extreme chalk. Even though it's a 14-game slate, I would expect him to be 25% or more in terms of ownership in all formats. And then you have, Dante Thornton there at 4-3, not really a play for me. And then you can come down and see my man Ramel Keaton at 4-1. That's a big line in the sand spot for me, Ramel Keaton. He gets hurt in warmups or there's something going on there that makes him a not so great of a play. He is just going to be so fun to watch this season. I think he'll perform like a 7K receiver. I know there's different pieces and different places here for this Vols offense, but at the end of the day, it's still going to operate in a video game like level, and there's going to be a ton of points for it. So you can pretty much play any of these Vols receivers and feel pretty good about it. In fact, I would highly recommend rotating through them if you're a multi-enter guy. The lock and load that Hendon Hooker does not apply as much to Joe Milton for me, just because he's not got the rushing ability that Hooker did, but he can certainly sling it. We might see some 400, 450, maybe even 500-yard games out of Milton this year, depending on how this offense is turned loose in blowout type situations. What do you think there in the Squirrel White Ramel Keaton situation? Because it seems like people are really heavy on the White side, and I'm of course Mr. Leverage all the way over here on the Keaton side.
Yeah, and I don't understand that at all. I mean, like we were using Ramel Keaton as a leverage piece off of Tillman and Hyatt last year. Like that's one thing, but like how do we know Ramel Keaton's not the dude this year? Like he might not be the leverage piece. He might just actually be the dude. And I think the bigger point is everybody can be the dude in this game. Like they're just going to do whatever they want, and they're going to have the ball so much that it's kind of like the USC thing last week. Like they're going to score pretty much at will. And San Jose State gave them a little bit more of a competitive game than probably what I expect out of Virginia, and Nick Nash doesn't play for Virginia. So, they're going to have to get it done early, and whoever scores the touchdowns early is probably going to end up with pretty high scoring day. But I think it's very possible that Ramel Keaton ends the season, if not the top receiver on Tennessee, right there. And so I don't see him taking a backseat at all. And I love that call, love that price point. Those that low to mid 4 price point, man, it's kind of looking good so far this year. So I'm right there with you with the Keaton call, and that's not to take anything away from anybody else on in that receiving group. They could all go off and all do well, but I think that one is probably going to be the best combination of a little bit lower price and also, maybe not as much gravity and industry eyeballs on him clicking his name. So.
Yeah. And I've also, it's super, I mean, we've had 2 slates, and it hasn't worked out yet. It's very early to stack, but this would be a team where, there's going to be people asking, can I play 2 of these receivers? Do I have to play Milton? Like there's going to be very many combinations of stacks you can do with this team that I think will ultimately work out this year. And I'm really anxious to see how the pecking order shakes out. But, yeah, man, I'm glad to hear that you're on board, because Keaton, I think, is going to have a really big year. And this price will not be here for very long after this first game. All right, moving right along here, we go to Colorado versus TCU. We got Deion Sanders, transfer galore. TCU looking a lot bit different from last year. What do you got for us on this one?
Well, yeah, both of these teams look quite a bit different. Obviously TCU probably, I mean, they didn't really have national championship aspirations last year. They made it happen, but probably would be even more surprised if they happen to get there this year with, all the talent that was lost. And so looking at this spread, I mean, I think it was a 20 and a half point spread or something. That's a lot of respect for that TCU defense. And nobody knows what to expect from Colorado. They're a complete wild card. None of these dudes played for Colorado last year. You got Primetime in there. He hasn't really coached on this stage before. Jacksonville State is one thing, but coaching his kid, there's a lot of stuff that could go, completely falling on his face, or it could all come together, and it's absolutely a wild card. And so there is still the TCU defense that he's going up against. And so I probably am not looking to load up on a ton of the Colorado side. I mean, I'm sure that Sanders at 7K is going to be an extremely popular pick. That's just kind of like the sexy thing to do. And everyone wants to jump on board that narrative, but like you're going into Dallas Fort Worth, you're playing a big time defense that has some holdovers. Most of what they lost was on the offensive side, and you're doing it with a unit that doesn't really have any cohesiveness or experience playing together on this stage. Like there will be a time that Colorado will absolutely nuke a slate once they figure it out. But the first game of the season against TCU on the road seems to me like, you're probably going to get let down if you go heavy on that Colorado offense. So it's not to say you can't pick your spots. There probably will be a few receivers. They will be passing a lot. That's the one thing I probably am pretty confident about. So if you're doing that, you can start that with Mr. Two-way player, Travis Hunter. If we think that he's going to get kind of full run on the offense, he's certainly, from what the depth chart says, he's going to do that. And hopefully he's able to do that at this level. That would be kind of a fun thing to see. And we also have Jimmy Horn Jr. and Xavier Weaver. And I'm not going to list who's a transfer because everyone's a transfer. But they're all just kind of in there as mercenaries, trying to get primetime to do his thing. If you were going to do the Sanders thing, I would pair him with multiple receivers and just try to nuke more than everybody else nukes. Because if it works out, it's going to really work out. But it's kind of an all or nothing play for me. I don't know, not particularly excited about Chandler Morris. I don't think that he's going to have to do a whole heck of a lot. I think it's mainly going to be the running game, and that's actually where most of my interest in this game lies from a DFS perspective, is trying to figure out exactly how that pecking order is going to work out, because all of the TCU running backs are cheap and should be pretty effective. How many times, Walt, did we play Kendre Miller and did he get 100 yards and a touchdown? Was that pretty much every week last year?
Yeah.
And so
it took like half the season for people to catch up to that play as well.
Yeah. And so that offense still exists. Like, yes, Kendre Miller is great, but he's not LaDainian Tomlinson. And he's off to the pros now, but I do think that offense is at least as much about scheme and linemen as it was about Kendre Miller's talent, and not to take anything away from him, but I think Imani Bailey has, enough talent to stop or to step into those shoes and hit the ground running against what is, probably a somewhat soft and discombobulated Colorado front. The one thing I don't see a primetime team doing is being extremely stout on the defensive line. Like that's just not the kind of style that I think they're going to play. And that is, music to the ears of an offensive coordinator. Hey, we can control the trenches and just pound the football down their throat, and someone is going to be the beneficiary of that. We've got, Imani Bailey and Trey Sanders, the Alabama transfer, are kind of the two guys that I think are going to be primary ball carriers, and assuming this one stays within reason, probably will get the bulk of the carries here. How they split that kind of remains to be seen, right? I think, if I had to guess, I would say probably 60% to Bailey and 30% to Sanders and 10% to somebody else, maybe Trent Battle. But I do think Imani Bailey is going to be the dude. DK pricing wise somewhat reflects that. If that's reversed and you have a 3,900 Sanders as the guy who's getting 60% of the carries, then you're going to really want that guy, right? So, or if he ends up getting 3 touchdowns or something, you're going to really want that guy. So I would say the way I'm attacking this is as much overall exposure as I can have to the TCU running game in particular. And we can give a passing mention to the receivers. I think Savion Williams is probably, if I'm interested, the only one that I'm interested in. But even then, it's like, man, 6,700 for not really the way that I think that game is going to flow. I'm probably just going to get away from that and stick to my running backs.
Yeah, we know that TCU is going to be able to run the ball just the way that they're built anyways. Monty Bailey, he didn't pop off necessarily the way that we thought he might in that first season with TCU, but, Darren Mercado out of there, I think at worst we'll see him perform at that level, which was pretty damn good. And then, possibly being Miller, they add some receptions there. You mentioned Colorado. Defensively, they're going to be looking to, make interceptions, highlight plays in the secondary. Trying to challenge them deep might not be the best idea, but you're going to be able to do some of those, dinking and dunking type passes that I think Bailey and maybe even Sanders could really benefit from. And we'll see how this TCU wide receiver room shakes out. The JPR, who is kind of the exciting, sexier option. You have JoJo Earl there eventually. You have Savion Williams, you mentioned. So there are some intriguing options, but I do think TCU receivers are going to be pretty much like last year. I know QJ ended up being a big time option, but remember how he struggled so many weeks as chalk. And I don't think we have a receiver in this room like that that's going to be super chalky on a week in and week out basis. And I think it'll be pretty high variance from game to game. So I'm with you. I want to really kind of just hone in on the TCU running backs, kind of like what we did last year, or myself especially. And then I do still like Chandler Morris. So he's kind of cheap at 6'9", right? Going up against this Colorado team. He actually runs, so I do like that. I mean, Hacksaw Duggan, he came – I don't know where the rushing ability he snatched up last season really came from, because he hadn't really done that leading into the season. And Chandler Morris is a little bit more, spry on his feet and has some quickness there, and I think he could do some damage. So I do like him at 6'9". I actually foresee him being relatively popular. So that may push me more towards a Bailey, like you said, if he's going to be a little bit more lower owned, or even possibly pairing them. I know it's kind of a cardinal sin in the NFL to play your quarterback and your running back together, but we know in college that works out more often than it doesn't. So that's some kind of pairing that I kind of want to look at. And on Colorado's side, if Shedeur Sanders, he's kind of a GPP only for me. I want to see how that shakes out. There, like you mentioned, there's a ton of new faces. Continuity is a big thing for me, so I don't know how that's gonna work out just yet. I really would like to see people just in droves play Travis Hunter. I think he's going to do a lot of defensive stuff. I mean, he's going to be all over the field doing some returning and stuff like that. But if people are rostering him with the thoughts that this guy's going to give me 20,
I think he's going to be extremely overowned. That was like the first thing I saw when I saw his price. I was like, everyone's going to be on him just because that, name value, the excitement level. And like the reality is, dude's going to be a little bit more tired than everybody else.
For sure. So that's one of those plays where I'm like, okay, I'll back off and be underweight, because even in Jackson State, like he made plays, but he wasn't statistically doing all that much. He was putting film to tape and making plays and all that, but he wasn't really doing anything for DFS purposes. And I kind of have that worry about him here in Colorado as well, especially when you have known commodities who have been good defense or on DFS boards, like a Jimmy Horn or a Xavier Weaver, who are going to be good for PPR. All right, moving right along here, we have Arkansas State versus Oklahoma. Arkansas State, they're kind of intriguing, not necessarily in this matchup, but it will be, when the midseason, Fun Belt and Maction and all these other conferences and stuff like that. I think we'll be able to use them to a degree. I don't necessarily like the fact that they're rolling out JT Shrout at quarterback, who comes from, speaking of Colorado, and had his chances with Tennessee and really has just been a journeyman and somebody who has a lot of weapons in this offense, but I just kind of feel like anyone at him. It's like Matthew Downing, who we saw earlier. Like, he has all these weapons, but it's Matthew Downing. He's just not good. He's not going to be able to utilize those guys right. And I kind of feel that way about Shrout, because they have a nice running back in Jaquaz Cross who can make plays. They have Corey Rucker back and supposedly healthy after missing basically all of last year after transferring to South Carolina. He had that sicko 52-yard touchdown catch where I was like, oh my God, Corey Rucker's so good. Then he couldn't play anymore. But 2021 with Ark State, 60 catches, 826 yards, 9 touchdowns. If he's healthy, good to go. He is absolutely great. But again, JT Shrout throwing him the football, I don't love that. They do have Jeff Foreman, who's solid, 500 yards last year, and then Syracuse transfer Courtney Jackson. So they have good pieces. They just have JT Shroud at quarterback. And I say that, and he's probably going to throw for like 400 yards tomorrow or Saturday. On the Oklahoma side, I always love Dillon Gabriel. I feel kind of spoiled. Like at this point, I feel he's been in college forever. We were using him years ago. I think like when I first met you, we're like, yeah, Dillon Gabriel's nice. And it's like, shit, we've been doing work together for almost 3 years now, and he's still in college. It's crazy. 9.1K. I love Dillon because he's usually expensive. People, they like to go a little cheaper, or they just go up to, that 10K, Caleb Williams and some of the other higher price guys. He just gets ignored a lot. He's rarely owned. He has rushing upside. He can throw for 300, 400 yards. He has weapons. He's just like, the guy's a gamer. He'll play hurt. I just love Dillon Gabriel so much. So the 9-1 price is certainly in play for me. Probably more of a GPP look. I haven't really looked at building a lineup for this slate. Ordinarily at this point in the week, I would have already had some lineups built, but we just had that gargantuan 11 gamer to kick things off. So I haven't quite got that far yet. We have a bunch of Oklahoma fans in our Discord talking up the running back situation. Tawi Walker, who's 3.7, is getting a ton of hype, not only in our Discord, but across social media and on Oklahoma boards as well. You have Marcus Major there. You have Javonte Barnes. Like, these guys are all going to get work, but Barnes at 7K, Marcus Major at 6.3. Like, I don't think so. Even if they're going to blow the doors off Ark State, and they should, Walker's going to end up probably getting all that second half work, and he's probably going to hit 100 yards if he does get anywhere north of like 10 to 12 carries or just 10 to 12 touches in general. So I do like his upside sitting there at 3.7. He's a very good play. I think you can get away with using him in all formats. And then at the wide receiver spot, they do have Andrell Anthony, who is a transfer from Michigan. He's 4.8. He's interesting. Jaleel Farouk at 7.5. That's a little bit too high priced for me. He might be okay. You have Austin Stogner sitting there below 4K. He's decent as well. Drake Stoops at 5.3. You have a bunch of guys, like, they're not below average by any means, but they're just not guys that I look to necessarily to start my lineups with. They're those type of guys where I'm like, yeah, I have this 4K left. I could probably use Austin Stogner, something like that. Farouk at 7.5 might end up being a heavy duty option, but again, I'm not starting the year off paying that price for him, and I'm not that excited about their receiver room. But I just think Dillon Gabriel is so good that he can turn these guys into adequate enough fantasy options depending on what their prices are. And I think that sub 5K price tag on Andrell Anthony is at least playable if you want to go with a Gabriel and stacking option there in the receiver room. That is Oklahoma, Arkansas State. Do you want to put any thoughts there before we move on?
Do like the Andrell Anthony call. He was a guy that I kind of was hoping could always do a little bit more at Michigan, and it was always like kind of a fighting an uphill battle, for playing time, and then also against the style of offense that they play there. Complete opposite scenario in Oklahoma. Like to air it out, have a pretty elite quarterback throwing it to him. I do think there's a lot of opportunity there. I like that call in particular. I like it a lot better than Farouk at 75. So I like that call. Obviously Gabriel, he seemed, and I think we've said this about him a lot, he seems like kind of a luxury play. Don't necessarily need to get there, but if you have the money, like there's definitely a floor that also has a ceiling with Dillon Gabriel, and he's been known to tuck it and run it, and sometimes for a really long way for a touchdown every now and then too. It's not the majority of his game, but it happens from time to time, and so that's when you see him really unlock that 35 plus point type ceiling. So yeah, I would probably be leaning towards those two in the passing game, Anthony and Gabriel, and then 3.7 for a back that is going to get probably 8 to 10 carries. Would you say that's a fair assessment at minimum? And against an inferior opponent that's been worn down all day, touchdown seems likely from that, and maybe breaks one for a long gainer. So yeah, Walker is probably the running back that I would be interested in too.
Yeah, and I feel like he would get work, like the other starters getting pulled in a blowout, and something like Walker just feels like he would still get work into the second half and beyond. So it's a really good situation to target. All right, we will move on here. We have Kentucky, a exciting team for fantasy purposes. I have a few things I want to say about them, but we'll get you there first. Against the Ball State Cardinal. Ooh, another Maction team. We got them early this year. What do you got for us?
Yeah, Mac decided to go out and get smacked in week one and play road games against all these Power Five teams. So it probably is going to be kind of a new look offense with Devin Leary coming in. I was never the world's biggest Will Levis fan. He did get it done from time to time, but like it was just never a guy I got super excited about it. I think I did play him back in like the Waddell Robinson days, and only because I did want to kind of stack him up and that kind of thing, and it paid off then. But Kentucky, by their nature, like they want to be a pound it down your throat kind of team, and they want to run it down your throat, and they have the exact right back to do that in Ray Davis. I'm so excited about Ray Davis at 7,100. That is probably my favorite play on the whole slate. With the difference in level of competition, Kentucky's willingness to just pound the rock time and time again, like they did with Rodriguez in seasons past, and like they will probably do with Ray Davis in this matchup. I would, if I were putting together the pricing for this slate, I would price him at like 9K, based on the kind of volume that I think he's going to get. And so 7,100 is a massive steal. And there's a number of guys in that situation that are priced lower than we expect, probably due to the nature of blowouts. But I think just the way that Kentucky plays, there is going to be a ton of opportunity for Davis to do a lot of damage, like 202 kind of damage. And so getting that for 7,100 is pretty valuable. That said, I also really like this receiver room with a dynamic quarterback and Devin Leary throwing to him. Barron Brown, Dane Key, and Tavian Robinson, like those are just elite names to be throwing to, and all in the 5K range. It's kind of like, it's not quite the Ohio State room from years past, but these are all, now experienced and talented guys. And they're going up against a MAC defense, right? Like they're gonna be successful. It's just a matter of how long they feel they have to keep passing to keep the ball moving, and which one gets multiple touchdowns, because they'll probably at least get one touchdown. I don't know if all three of them will, but there's the ability to get one touchdown for all three of them. And if one of them lucks into two touchdowns, then that guy's probably going to be pretty useful on the slate, because they're all in that 5K price range. So I'm going to tentatively sprinkle exposure to those three into the builds, but I'm mainly going to be focused on Ray Davis. And obviously if I want to run multiple Kentucky receivers, probably not running Davis in that scenario, and I probably am running Leary, which I think is viable. It's just not the way that I'm thinking is the most probable outcome of this one. And then on the Ball State side, nope. I can't get there on the Ball State side. I mean, if you want to make a volume related argument on Marquez Cooper, who that was one of the stranger transfers, to just stay in the MAC after being at Kent State, and being the guy, like he 35-40 touches a game. They gave him all the work he wanted, and so like we were like, oh, okay, Marquez Cooper's in the portal. I hope he ends up at somewhere that, Power 5 team that needs a running back that can handle a lot of volume. And he's like, oh, Ball State. It's just an odd thing to do. Maybe he didn't get the offers he was hoping for, or whatever. But there will be times where Marquez Cooper will be a very good play. Maction will definitely be part of those times. at Kentucky week 1, priced at 7,400 is probably not one of those times. But a name to put on the back burner for the future. So not going to use them here, but do think about using them in the future. And then I'm scrolling through the receivers. They're all 3K.
It's ugly. It's ugly.
I'm probably not using a Ball State receiver. And I would encourage, you to try to do literally anything else. But if you really want to, they're all 3K. And so you can just kind of roll the dice, but I'm not going there, and I don't see any reason to go there. I think there's enough value in other places on this slate that you would really be kind of burning a spot on a Ball State receiver.
Oh yeah, if you're starved for value, which we have some cheapies on this slate, then maybe you'd say like somebody has to catch the ball. In this case, probably like a Tanner Koziel. But this is the first time in like, I don't know, literally half a decade where there hasn't been a receiver on Ball State where I'm like, yeah, this guy's really good. He's going to be putting up some points during the action games. We can bet on him. We can play him in DFS. It's just like such an ugly receiver room. And perhaps maybe Marquez Cooper, like that was the move for him. He knew that this receiving room was going to be just awful. And maybe he thought, I'm going to get the ball a lot and I'm going to be able to take some snaps in the slot. Like maybe they're going to use him in a myriad of ways, like the Hawaii special, but it's very, very odd. I would have loved to have seen him go to like a Michigan State or an Iowa. I know Iowa has running backs, but like those type of teams, Minnesota.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was
they do have Lane Hatcher back. Yeah, for sure. They do have Lane Hatcher. He's cheap, but yeah, where he doesn't have the great weapons. And Kentucky, like, Coach Calipari in basketball, called them we're a basketball school. A couple years ago, he got a hard time for that. And I'm starting to feel like lately, the last couple of years, Kentucky's starting to kind of dip into football school territory. And I really like their roster, both offensively and defensively. I think they're going to be a pretty solid group. And yeah, that receiving room is nice. You touched on Barian Brown, he at the tight end spot. They actually have some pretty decent looks there in Jordan Dingle, Isaiah Cummings. Like they're going to have some real weapons here. And I love Ramon Davis. He's kind of like, we all have our show favorites. And then we have our individual, Jake Brand favorite. And Ray Davis is definitely like a shared guy. But I think over the last season, he's veered off into your territory and you've been really on him a lot. And you're usually getting him right. So I love it. They still got Jutane McClain, who never really got the opportunity. And then in a weird move, Demi Sumo, heading over there from NC State. But they run the ball a lot, so they can still have like Davis getting 18 to 20 touches and support other guys getting touches in this backfield because of how they run the football. So it should be okay. All right, moving on to the next game for me, ECU versus Michigan. Talk about a team that has lost a lot. ECU, no more Holton, Ehlers. I did the preseason thing and covered preseason, and he was on my Seahawks for a little bit, and he looked pretty good there, but gone out of our lives for CFB DFS. He was really, really good often, and nobody really rostered him except us. But they have Mason Garcia, who's a junior stepping in there, not interested in the least. I think there will be times for this ECU team, like a Rajay Davis or Harris, a Marlon Gunn. These are names that we have each kind of, talked about in the right situation. They're both really cheap here. They want to try to, get you to take a 3.7 Harris or a 4.4 Gunn. Not the spot to do so here on, against Michigan. They're kind of being taken right into the fire here. Now the receiver room does have weapons. Jalen Johnson, Jose Hatfield, Jahari Patterson. Like there's some guys who are going to get looks here and play pretty decent. I think this, like I said, this ECU offense might not be as bad as it looks on paper. There's some names we can definitely use. This is just not the spot for me at all. I do really like Michigan. It pains me because I'm not really a fan of Michigan. I'm still like, the Harbaugh year. Well, I shouldn't even say this because you're from the Bay Area. I was going to say the Harbaugh, like, Niners era, and how we were like really just hating each other from Seattle to San Francisco. But so I'm not a big Harbaugh guy, but I do like what we've got here for Michigan. JJ McCarthy, really, really expensive. That does turn me off of this particular game at 9.4. I want to get him back in that 7K range before you really start to look at him again. But he's got a lot to prove, and I think he's certainly going to be viable throughout this season. But we know Michigan, in a game where they should take care of business, is going to run and run and run. Blake Corum is 6'9". I know that's a price that stuck out to you probably when you first saw the slate. And then Donovan Edwards at 6'2". And it's just that thunder and lightning, yin and yang, power and speed combination. Edwards can catch the ball. Corum to a degree as well. Corum kind of some health issues of late. The last couple of seasons, he's just kind of wearing down. And that kind of leads me to believe that Edwards might handle a little bit more carries than maybe we suspect. There'll definitely be games where Corum racks up those, Braylon Allen-esque, 28 to 30 carries. Like that will happen, but I think it'll happen a lot less than maybe people expect it to. And Edwards is going to be that guy where they're both producing at a high level. And they have others who are kind of exciting this running back room too, like a CJ Stokes kind of waiting in the wings. So there's a lot to like in this running back room. Both of those guys are viable. In fact, I've considered in the past running both of them when healthy. And I certainly looking at both in this spot where I think they're both going to get double-digit carries with ease, get some reception target type of looks. At 6'9" and 6'2", they're certainly worth a shot, maybe pairing up and just gobbling up all that, production. Because I don't know that McCarthy's going to have to really sling it. He'll definitely pass for some touchdowns in this one, but I don't know that he'll do enough to pay off that price. My man Roman Wilson sitting there at 5K. That's a big time bait by DK. I certainly love Roman Wilson. AJ Barner is there, Samaj Morgan. There's some decent options in this receiver room. Colston Loveland is a guy that I'm really high on this year. He's going to have that position all to himself there, running some tight end, some slot, and he's going to be somebody that I think puts up a ton of points. I don't love him here at 5'2", but we've had some real good success with tight ends, especially tight ends that kind of go under the radar over the past, year or two. He's definitely one that I'm going to have on my radar there, especially when I saw that he might be playing some other positions there during camp. So I'm all about the Michigan side here, and for good reason. And I think we'll see probably a lot of rostership on both. And we'll get a lot of people asking, Corum or Edwards, Corum and Edwards. So before we move to the next game, kind of want to get your take on where you might lean between those two.
Is CJ Stokes an option?
Yeah, I love Stokes too, honestly.
I mean, it's yes, getting both of those at their respective prices does feel like a gift, but there's very few scenarios where this game is not wildly out of hand by the second quarter, and you're going to need Edwards to go for 7 carries and 150 yards and 2 touchdowns to be a relevant dude on the slate, right? And same thing for Corum, maybe on even fewer carries, and so they, don't get me wrong, they very much have the ability to do that, but you're kind of pigeonholing yourself into extremely efficient play, which they should do some of, but it's just a hard thing to really need from them. Whereas they're going to have the ball for 70% of the second half, and they're going to be running that entire time. If we think CJ Stokes is that third guy, which I would imagine he probably would be, it's going to be getting second half carries. That's probably more where I'm inclined to lean if forced to take a Michigan running back. I think that you'll get really excited seeing, one of the two or even both of Corum and Edwards, having an amazing first quarter and first half of the second quarter. And then, you'll see 3 random tight ends catching a touchdown, and all of your equity of points while the game still matters gets sapped out, throughout the second quarter. And then the second half is all just going to be killing clock, running the ball with somebody who is maybe CJ Stokes. So I think that's, if I'm going to play that side of it, I think that's probably how I'm going to play it. But yeah, I'm probably going to also sneak in Edwards. I think of the two, I'd probably rather play Edwards, and just, hoping he has those 2 long touchdowns early. But I don't think I'm going to be overexposed to that.
Yeah, my feeling on it is I'll lean towards Edwards as well. Corum had some nice games early last year in blowouts where he just completely exploded, and we had some Corum chalk fades where we're like, oh God, no, and he scored 4 times in the first half. That's definitely on the table, but I like Edwards just because of his explosiveness. And I feel kind of like I said, Corum, there's been some health stuff the last season or two where they might, if they can take him off the field early if they don't need him, they might be more inclined to do that. Although if there's a Heisman talk and statistics and stuff, he might push his way back on the field. But I kind of feel like they might treat him a little bit more like a bubble boy than years past, just because of recent history with injuries. So I think Edwards is kind of my main team guy at this moment. But yeah, Stokes is another guy that, you have to certainly consider at that cheap price. He's like at 4.2. Like if he was at 3K, I think I might even be more like, yeah, I'm just going to go for it. They at least priced him somewhat decently at 4.2, but it might not matter. Like you said, they're going to pile up the points here for sure. All right. So that takes us to Utah State and Iowa. There are new faces and new places. And normally an Iowa team, not really something we look at for DFS purposes, but there are some guys on Iowa that might have our eye. So what do you think about Iowa, Utah State?
First, let's get the easy part out of the way early. I'm probably not super interested in much of the Utah State side, even though like they are kind of like a DFS darling. Like they always end up on those 4-game slates at the end of the night, and you end up knowing the Utah State offense really, really well because of that. Mm-hmm. And it's another iteration of, hey, get to know these guys, but this isn't the spot for them going up against Iowa on the road. Just it's an easy path to failure using those guys. On the Iowa side, I don't know. Maybe you're seeing something I'm not seeing. The only guy I really have a ton of interest in is Caleb Johnson. They pretty much are anointing him the volume back that we've seen, Goodson be in years past, and there always ends up being kind of an Iowa back emerge from the arcane offense there as a useful DFS piece. And at 5,700, I mean, that, like, if you're getting 15 to 18 carries at 5,700 against an inferior opponent with a dominant offensive line, that's 100-yard 2-touchdown type upside. If Iowa can move the ball enough to get on the right side of the field where touchdowns happen, and so I think against Utah State they probably should. Utah State opened against Illinois last year. Is that right? Does that sound right to you? Anyway,
I believe so. Yeah.
And like the big question, week 0 or week 1, whenever it was, do we think that Chase Brown can put up the volume against this defense? And then he went for like 28 carries and 160 yards and 2 or 3 touchdowns. He went nuts. And so I'm not expecting quite that kind of game from Caleb Johnson, but I do think it'll be that kind of mismatch. Offensive line versus defensive line in the trenches, and Caleb Johnson is poised to be the primary beneficiary of that. And that just is a perfect fit with what Iowa wants to do. It's an even more extreme version of what Kentucky wants to do, and not a ton of interest in slinging the rock around, although they've got a new guy doing it. And we're finally into a new era of Iowa quarterbacks. I don't know that it's going to be a whole lot better. But if you do want to dip your toe into the Iowa passing game, you've got the Michigan connection with Cade McNamara and Eric All coming over from Michigan and maybe having some chemistry there. Kind of narrow, not a ton of explosiveness or upside in that pairing. And I mean, a couple other shouts and Luke Lacey and I guess Nico Raggiani's somewhat of a brand favorite because he's had big games at low ownership at low dollar amounts in the past. Not a ton, not with a lot of frequency, and it's not really what they're looking to do in that offense. But there's a few cheapy type 30 8 to 4,500 type receivers to look at on the Iowa side, but my main interest lies with Caleb Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, the Iowa offense is going to be better, and they're not going to be offensive fantasy juggernauts, but anything is better than what we've been seeing. And I think that this is really the year for the staff to figure it out. And they went to the portal and they brought in a bunch of guys, right? Cade McNamara, I know that doesn't ring fear in people's hearts when they hear that name, but he's at least an adequate passer. They can put him in a position to make plays. He has a couple of tight ends, Luke Lachey, who's kind of one of those combo receiving tight ends. That's pretty good, actually. We know Eric always familiar with him. He can play. They got the kid from Charleston Southern, Seth Anderson, who's got pretty good hands, who runs good routes. Is going to be a factor. They do have Caleb Brown, who's going to be a much better option for them. So I think that they will look better and they'll be adequate. And if they're going to be cheap as these weeks go on and we prices start to balloon and Iowa guys are sitting there at 3-5 and 4-5, I'm not necessarily kicking them out of my lineup. I maybe not prioritizing them, especially in week one, but I do think they're a little bit better for fantasy purposes than we're accustomed to in the past there. And yes, Caleb Johnson is definitely going to see a lot of work, and the benefit of having a better quarterback around should obviously help him as well. I love what you said about Utah State. Get to know them for the future because, yes, they'll be on some later slates. They got Cooper Legas there, Levi Williams floating around there, just carcass shell of a body. They got some decent running backs. They have the Vaughn kid, Terrell Vaughn, who's the WR1. So, yeah, it's not the spot for them now, but definitely one to store and remember for later. But yes, I don't want you to be surprised if Iowa puts up some decent scores. And for them, decent scores like 21, right? 21, 24, like more than 3. So that's kind of where my head's at with that. All right, moving on here, we have Mercer versus Ole Miss. This is another one of those games where, I stayed up really late last night, with these teams that people don't know and really tried to get the bang for our buck there. Worked a little bit, didn't work as well on others, but this Mercer team, they've got some guys who are certainly intriguing. We'll start with the known commodity here, though, with Ole Miss here. You got Jackson Dart there at 7-2. He's okay, I suppose. The receiver room for Ole Miss has the names. It's got real name value, but they haven't necessarily been able to turn transfers into fantasy gold on a more consistent, basis that we would like to see. Jalen Robinson experiment, it didn't work out. But they have Caden Prescorn from Memphis, who I love, the QB converted into a tight end, kind of a combo. I've been using that term a lot, combo tight end. He's 3.8 there. I really like Caden Prescorn. He did as well last year. They've got Trey Harris. We'll see what he can do. 6'1", probably not using him yet, but there's a lot of hype there. Zachary Franklin, I'm hoping he doesn't get the J. Rob treatment where he gets there. He's a big name. He was really productive in his previous school. He comes to Ole Miss and just nothing happens. And it's not even really injuries. It's just there's too many other, people to feed in this. There's Jordan Watkins. There's Dayton Wade. There's just a lot of different players. Michael Trigg still, running around there. Jalen Knox is around, and there's a lot of different guys who can really pop at any time here for this Ole Miss team. But also the fact of the matter is Quinshawn Judkins, and Ulysses Bentley is back too, of course, but Judkins now in a situation where, hey, you couldn't keep him off the field. You got Zach Evans. Evans comes from, TCU where they're treating him with kid gloves. He comes to Ole Miss. He's going to get all these carries. The Judkins 3-star special comes on and just says, nope, you're going to put me on the field because every time you do, I'm going to run for 100 yards and multiple touchdowns. Now he doesn't have to share the rock as much. Bentley he's a short yardage guy. He can do some stuff. He can spell Judkins, but he's certainly not a guy that I think at this stage of his career we have to worry about getting 20-plus carries. God forbid Judkins getting hurt or something like that. But I know that I've been reading a few reports, the blowouts, he's not going to get the full run. I don't really subscribe to that at all. I think blowout or not, the man is going to put up 100-plus and 2 touchdowns. He doesn't even really need that many carries. He was getting them there late in the season, but he was just so hyper efficient. You might remember early in the year, 10 carries, 100 yards, 14 carries, a couple touchdowns, 19 carries. And it's really hard to continue that level of play on those little of carries, but he continued to do it week in and week out. And it got to the point where it was just became a joke with this guy. He's 7K. We finally have to jump off. Nope. 150 and 2. Okay. He's going to be 8K. We got to jump off. Nope. 150 and 2. So he's just so very good. Towards the end of the season, he kind of, you could see him gassed out a little bit. And maybe they do try to save him more in a game like this, but I still think we're seeing 20 touches out of him. The price is reasonably fair at 6.6. He should be priced at, to me, 8K. I think that it's kind of a bit of a misprice. But I know that the blowout factor is there. And if that gets people away from him and people are really, making a big deal about that, I'm fine with taking him at 6.6 because I'm pretty confident even in 2.5 quarters that he pays that price off because Zach Evans is not around anymore. And I'm not that worried about Ulysses Bentley, even though saying that I probably insured he's going to put up 150 yards now. But Quinshawn is just an absolute fantasy god. And we're not surprising anybody by saying that, but I think we might get him at lower ownership on week 1, and that could be a little bit of a mistake. All right. On the Mercer side, there is, some playable options here. They're all relatively cheap guys. They have a quarterback here in Carter Peavy at 4.5 that, there's going to be some points put on the board. Ole Miss defense in the past has been a pretty rugged unit. They've improved. They've like Texas getting better. USC supposedly getting better on defense, although we saw how that worked out. So I think that we could see some Mercer putting some points on here and getting a starting QB and somebody that you can throw into GPP lineups at min price like that kind of gives you a huge leg up on the rest of the field. Because if he puts on a big game like, Sam Hill did for Rhode Island today, you're going to be so far ahead because you're going to have all those savings that you then were able to plug into some of those higher price running backs and wide receivers. At the running back spot, they have 2 main guys, but they're both super cheap. Not as interested there, but again, min price running back getting 15 plus touches, maybe, via receptions, targets, some carries, certainly in play. And then they have a sub 4K receiver room. I'm not as interested there. It would just be like, if I want to go a little bit crazy and play like the quarterback, maybe I do that, or maybe I take one of the running backs in one of my throwaway lineups. But otherwise, I'm not really going to get too crazy with trying to play a Mercer guy in my main lineup by any means. But I am on Quinshawn. I am on a Michigan running back, and maybe that's like where my line in the sand plays are this week, and maybe I'm different from that. And if that's the case, I feel pretty excited about this slate. So how do you handle a guy like Quinshawn in a blowout situation like this, knowing how efficient he's been?
So I think the biggest differentiator is that there's not a 1B Edwards type guy the way there was with Evans last year, and that could go one of 2 ways in your rationale. Way number 1 is he probably gets like 80% of the work in the first half, and Quinshawn against Mercer should just absolutely dominate with 80% of the work in the first half. The other side of that is he's probably not going to play at all in the second half, right? And so you better hope that he does dominate, or they don't, score on defensive touchdowns or score on, punt return touchdowns or score long passing touchdowns, because he's going to have to get all that work done quickly for him to be relevant. Because I don't see Mercer keep it up, right? So I like him more than I like Corum for sure. I probably also like him more than I like Edwards. I just don't know that I like him. I mean, it's so hard to say because, man, like if you would have told me that was his price and then he was going to get even 2.5 or definitely if he's getting 3/4 of work, yes. But if like he starts kind of seeding work midway through the second quarter and like doesn't get back on the field, or maybe Mercer puts up a long drive and eats a bunch of clock in the second quarter, and you're just going, okay, well that's cool that they're now down 35-7 instead of 35-0, but we're still probably not going to see much Jukins in the second half. It's going to be in the back of my mind the way that, if you have a running back in a more competitive game, knowing that they're going to get full run, it's a better feeling knowing that they're going to play the whole game, but it's an incredibly hard thing to get away from entirely. So I want exposure to him. I'm probably not as line in the sand as you are about it, but I definitely want exposure to him. On the other side, not that this is a dude that like we need to massively expose ourselves to, by any means, but I just have to call out this Ty James stat line against Samford last year. Did you catch that one?
Yeah, he's a dude, man.
13 catches for 351 yards and 2 touchdowns, reminiscent of JSN in the Rose Bowl. Like, just incredible statistical performance. Not the only game that he did well. Obviously, he's going to get a ton of targets, not going to have a whole lot of efficiency. At 3.8, especially if you are going to go the Jukins route, maybe that's, a way that you come back with Ty James at 3.8. Just because there's going to be so much passing volume, they're going to be chasing a ton of points. And, even if he catches 30% of his targets, if he gets 15 targets, that's still 5 catches, maybe he breaks one. And, 5 catches, 100 yards and a touchdown is a pretty good day at 3.8, right? So if I'm going to anybody on the Mercer side, that's probably who I'm going to.
Yeah, it's just so tough with these Isaiah Woodens and high volume receivers on these teams, because even though they're facing like a P5 or upper tier team, not that Ole Miss is not good, but even they're facing a team that can get beat defensively. It's so tough because you just never know. Sometimes you get the the Nash, and sometimes you get the Wooden and stuff. But yeah, James has just got peppered with targets all season long there. So certainly intriguing for sure. All right, let's move on to the Portland State and Oregon game.
Yeah, so Oregon got smashed in their opener last year, decided to go a different route than that this year. And so obviously we expect them. I didn't even look at the spread on that. I'm sure it's in like the high 30s or low 40s.
Oh, yeah.
Do you happen to have that up?
I don't know if they have it. I don't even think they have. There's some of these teams with the FCS and stuff, they don't even have spreads for them on DK. I don't even see one for that.
Yeah. So, but I would make it at least low 40s, if not more than that. So
yeah, they don't have.
How much do you believe in the Bo Nix Heisman campaign is how you're going to play this one, right? Like if you think that Oregon is all in on the Bo Nix Heisman campaign and they let him just absolutely run wild, you could make him 15K and he would be worth playing because he's going to do everything and score all the touchdowns. And if they keep their foot on the gas for, recruiting purposes, for Bo Nix purposes, for elevating Bo Nix draft stock purposes, for there's a lot of reasons and rationale to keep him in there and keep him doing things. And have him running the ball into the end zone, which he likes to do when they get down there towards the goal line, then you can absolutely go that route. There's enough value elsewhere to play Bo Nix. And frankly, I'm not in love with a lot of the quarterbacks on this slate. It's not a slate where there's a ton. We'll get to a few that I do like, but it's not a slate where there's like a $5,200 quarterback that I'm like, oh, I have to play that guy. So I couldn't even consider Bo Nix at 10-1. Right. So, obviously very high floor, he's gonna get the job done. He's gonna call his own number a lot at the goal line, which helps that floor even further. He's an extremely hard guy to pair with receivers because there's 8 guys that are going to be rotating in and out. And yes, Troy Franklin is more or less an alpha, but even as an alpha, did he have a single 2-touchdown game last year? He had one 2-touchdown game last season. And so you're also and he's at 7,700. If you pair him with Nix, all of your salary is in this ridiculous Oregon game against Portland State. And so I don't see any reason to necessarily try to figure that out and stack. I think especially the quarterback that runs it in as much as he does, I'm happy to play him by himself. And I'm probably not like leaning towards anyone in the passing game because of how spread out they are. In a different kind of game environment, I'd have some interest in Trayshawn Holden. Transferring in, probably going to want to get him involved and comfortable in that offense. And, same to be said for Gary Bryant. But I also want to see kind of how that depth chart shakes out and how that usage shakes out in a competitive environment, as opposed to whatever it is that we're going to call this. Could see Terrence Ferguson looking into, a couple red zone looks and maybe gets a touchdown, but not a high volume or an explosive guy by any means. As far as the running backs go, you would think that the logical thing with such a massive spread would be like they're just going to pound the rock and there's going to be rushing touchdowns galore. And yes, Bucky Irving could get, 80 yards and a couple touchdowns, could get 150 yards and a couple touchdowns, could also get like 60 yards and no touchdowns because he's going to carry it between the 20s, and then Lance Harbor is going to take it in for the touchdown once they get to the goal line. So it's not as safe as you might think it would be to play a $6,100 Bucky Irving. And same goes to a lesser degree with Noah Whittington. He's probably actually the guy that I would lean towards, because in blowout games, you do actually see him get some decent run. And by that time, they've either taken Nix out or they've told him to stop running the ball himself. And so you do actually have a decent chance of getting some touchdown equity with Whittington, but it's not like he's 3.8 or something. He's 5K as well. So I think they actually did a pretty good job of making you decide and commit to these Oregon players, as opposed to just letting yourself be filled up by the volume. And so, I think I'm mainly on Bo Nix and maybe sprinkling a cheap receiver, but probably not even doing that. And then the Portland State side, it's the same thing as every other scenario like this. Yes, if you think they can keep up with the talent, they have a cheap quarterback, they have cheap receivers, there's going to be a lot of volume, and it's going to be extremely inefficient. Maybe you have a sneak on the Portland State side that you could use as a run back to the Bo Nix Heisman campaign, but I couldn't come up with one.
No, I don't think so. It's they got a quarterback who can use, but I'm kind of feeling burnt on some of these FCS squads that have guys who can put up points, but not in these situations here. And I think Andrew Van Buren was running around Portland State's team at one point too. I don't know if he's actually still on the roster or not, but I'm looking at just the Oregon side as well. I like Tez Johnson a lot. Not enough to play him at that 6.8 price, but everything I've read over the summer is that Nix and Tez are like just super tight, clicky, like hanging out all the time. And that happened to work last week when we had the Cordero Nash, hanging out all the time explosion. A little bit of a different scenario here with prices way higher and more known commodities. But Tez Johnson, he did some good things for us over the last couple of years before getting to Oregon. So GPP wise, I think he could be the guy if you're looking for somebody to pair up with Nix. Kind of like him, but the price is extraordinarily high. And yeah, it's crazy. We're 2 years removed from like even suggesting Bo Nix as a DFS play at like 5.5 for Auburn, and literally watch the people in the Discord or the shows and just be like, what? And all collectively shuddering, like, what are you talking about? And now we're here talking about Heisman Bo Nix 10-1, yes, being a main team play. Life truly does come at you very, very fast. All right, let's move on to the Rice and Texas game. Now, Rice has some pieces. I don't necessarily like them. Rosner is off to NC State. We saw a little bit of him tonight. JT Daniels, who just continues to look for a spot that he can flourish at, and he somehow continues to like lose the job, even though he goes to these different programs. So he should be the starting quarterback for Rice, but if he lost the gig, it wouldn't shock me at this point in year 6. Running back, Ari Broussard is the name to really know. Not interested in him here. And then the top receiver and really the top option for DFS whenever Rice will be on a slate is Luke McCaffrey, but he's not priced cheaply at all at 7-1, so pretty obvious there. DK saw that coming. Don't hate it for GPPs, but obviously we're not stopping, doing anything with our lineups there. Now the Texas side, there is a lot to like here. Quinn Ewers at 7-7. That's an intriguing price. You saw, they throwing the ball almost 50 times last year into the bowl season. It was something that he's going to be challenged on all offseason. Can he throw volume? Can he throw deep? Can he be more accurate? And we didn't really see that consistency last year. I think we see a totally different version of him this year, especially when you look at that running back room for Texas. And it's, obviously it's completely different. We don't see names that we're accustomed to seeing in that Texas backfield. Ewers will be asked to do more things than we are probably used to seeing him do, and I think he has the pedigree to really handle it. But there still is going to be, there's no Ro Johnson, there's still Keelan Robinson, there's no super stud best Texas running back the last couple of years, but there is some fantasy viability here for this Texas squad in the running back room. No Bijan, of course, but you have Jonathan Brooks sitting there at 5'3". You have CJ Baxter sitting there at 5'5". Now we know Keelan Robinson and a little bit about Brooks after seeing, some of the stuff that he did in spot duty. But the freshman CJ Baxter has pedigree. He has electric running. He has really, really great ability. Somebody that I'm interested to see. And sitting there, they priced him higher than Brooks, which makes it tough. Can't really get some maneuverability there because that would have been a play at like 4 or 5 where I would have really been like, yeah, Baxter is the guy. We got to get more exposure to him. So he's not really necessarily a sneak, but he's definitely on my radar and somebody that I'm considering using. And I don't think that we have to worry about the blowout as much here. Obviously, it's probably going to happen, but Baxter's somebody that they're going to want to get meaningful reps as they head into conference play here. At the receiver spots and tight end, we have our guy Jatavian Sanders back, priced at only 3.7. We're rewinding back to early last season. We knew Ewers was going to use this tight end as a baby blanket. He did use Sanders for us. He went off. He became super chalk. Then he didn't go off anymore. We stopped using him, and now we're back at this 3.7 price point. Might people forgot about who Jatavian Sanders is? I don't think so. I think he will garner ownership. I think Xavier Worthy sitting there at 6.6, always a good GBP play. I don't find myself using him very often in main lineups just because there is some uncertainty there with the targets at times. And he is kind of almost a deep ball specialist at times as well. Jordan Whittington's still around. Adonai Mitchell is sitting there at 5.5 coming over from the SEC. Isaiah Nair healthy now, perhaps. So this receiving room and tight end group is really, really strong, really solid, and I think we see Ewers throw the ball a lot more. So I do obviously like Sanders at 3.7, and I will have exposure there. He's just no longer a secret anymore. I'll have to find some other sneaky plays for us to use, but that 3.7 price tag is certainly appealing. And then, of course, as I mentioned, Baxter there at the running back spot. They're being more expensive than Brooks, which isn't ideal, but I think he's going to be a really, really good player. Will he be Bijan Robinson right away? No, but could he be Bijan Robinson later? I think that is a possibility. And I know those are big shoes to fill, but he is really, really good. If you get a chance to watch any of his scrimmages or high school stuff, and I know that's, a lot different level than the collegiate level, he just has that look about him that he's a superstar. What do you do with Texas? Because again, we got more running backs that are viable, but blowouts, minus 35, 35-point spread, playing time snaps. What are you doing with these guys?
Yeah, so I mean, same problem we've talked about in a number of different spots. I think I probably the difference here is yes, there's kind of a 1A 1B thing, but they're both pretty cheap. It's not high to mid 6s, it's low to mid 5s, and so I think I probably lean Baxter, just because they're, probably made a lot of promises to get him there and as a 5-star, and like in this, ridiculous recruiting class after recruiting class with Texas, is probably the only one that's going to see the field. Like I don't think we're gonna see much Arch Manning anytime soon, right? And so they're gonna want their shiny toy to shine early. And so, yes, I think that there's going to be some volume concern, but he, like you said, has the ability to make that up on efficiency, and you're not killing yourself by committing to the salary as much as you would with a Corum or a Judkins, right? So I think I'm probably leaning that direction with Baxter, and that Sanders price just doesn't make any sense. I don't need huge pieces of the Longhorn passing game by any means, but I can't not be involved in a 3.7K Jatavian Sanders. Like it's too cheap for the volume and red zone looks that he gets. So not that they'll need to pass a ton, but he should be able to do kind of whatever he wants in that offense, and he should be up there with Whittington and Mitchell, and not in the mid to high 3K range. So kind of have to get some exposure to him based on what he's able to do. Probably not paying up for Worthy, even though there's that game-breaking ability. He's only really shown it a few times, and could break a big one early, but he kind of needs to at that price. And so, again, pigeonholing yourself into a very high variance type of player with Worthy. So I think, just Baxter and Sanders and move on for me.
Yeah, and Sanders he's so great in the red zone, has that touchdown equity, and those back-to-back huge weeks, and it's going to be kind of hard to get away from him. And the Texas Longhorns running back room is so stupid, not like stupid as bad, but as the kids say, stupid as in like elite. They have Jadon Blue, who's a 4-star top 100 kid from like a year or two ago, and he's just not even probably playing, but he's there if they need him. That's just how crazy. Like your RB4 could be the starter on like 70% of the rest of the collegiate level football. It's just nuts how good this Texas team is with talent. All right, moving on here. Let's get you to go into the Buffalo and Wisconsin game. No more Graham Mertz. We saw him. He threw for 300 yards for Florida. It's a step in the right direction. Life without Graham Mertz for Wisconsin. Take it away.
So this might be one of the, outside of like Georgia Tech not running the triple option anymore, or like the service academies no longer running a triple option, Wisconsin going to a high volume passing attack in theory, or at least in the context of it being Wisconsin, and throwing Tanner Mordecai in the middle of all that is extremely interesting. It makes them like just such a more DFS relevant team. It makes them a more, at least for me, enjoyable team for me to follow. And it's not as though they're going to be particularly tested here. Once again, we have a MAC team playing a road game against a pretty competent Power 5 opponent. And I think it was like a 28-point spread. So like, obviously we expect Wisconsin to do all of the things and have the ball a lot. But I do think they're going to want to show off a bit with Tanner Mordecai, and, with him coming over from SMU. And like, obviously we know what that passing attack has been capable of. And he's got a very different scheme than what Wisconsin has run in the past, which was just pound Braylon Allen 20 times, 25 times a game. They're going to air it out more. They're going to throw more. And I think these receivers are actually pretty underpriced for what they're capable of in a high volume offense. I mean, Kimre DK was, a high 4s, low 5s receiver in a low volume passing offense. He should be like 7 in the kind of offense that they're going to be running. And He's at 5.4. I have a lot of interest in him, especially in lineups where you're going to be using Mordecai. And actually, Mordecai is one of the quarterbacks I am more interested in, just because, it being so early in the season, people likely are not as attuned to the coaching and scheme changes that took place at Wisconsin. They're going to say, oh, Tanner Mordecai is way overpriced for what Wisconsin wants to do. We're not going to see any passing volume from him. I think we get some lower ownership on him than we will later in the season. So I am pretty interested in Mordecai with DK. I know Skylar Bell is kind of a guy of yours that you've always liked over the seasons, and I think there would be some validity to using him in Mordecai lineups as well. There's not a ton that I want to get to, other than maybe Will Pauling. There was, I guess, some health issues there. I don't know that he's 100% yet. You probably want to get confirmation on him prior to kickoff and prior to putting him into a lineup at 5,100. But it's also pretty tough to hit him instead of DK at 54, because I think that's where a lot more of the explosiveness is going to come from. And Mordecai, has shown the ability to feed those explosive receivers, whether it's a Rashay Rice or Reggie Roberson, going back a ways now with Tanner Mordecai and his abilities. But he likes to get the ball to those explosive guys and let them kind of do the work. Running back room, two-headed monster. Braylon Allen is right there in the middle of all of those, Corum and Judkins and, Mayan Williams, all the guys that are in blowout games that may not see their typical workload. He is also interesting. If I'm going to play Mordecai and receiver stacks, I'm probably not going to also throw Braylon Allen into those. I don't see him catching a ton of passes or getting super involved in the passing game. If I'm going to play him on his own, and I'm going to be somewhat of a fish and not taking any of the coaching and personnel changes into account, that could still work out. Like, Braylon Allen is still very capable of 100 yards and 2 touchdowns on 5 carries, especially against an overmatched MAC defense. And so I'm not getting away from Braylon Allen by any means. I just want to properly contextualize what's going on with Wisconsin, and that we can look at more than just Braylon Allen now in terms of being successful. So I want a lot of exposure overall to this Wisconsin offense. I just want it kind of spread out across different lineup constructions. And, we're not doing the quarterback, running back, wide receiver thing in any one particular lineup, I don't think, because I don't see Buffalo keeping pace to the degree that they would need to make that sort of build optimal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's kind of weird with Wisconsin because, ordinarily for the past 2 seasons, we'd see a 6-7 Braylon Allen and be like, well, that's auto lock. He's 40-50% owned. But it's like, yeah, I think he's fine. And he's probably still putting up 20 fantasy points, but he's just, I don't know. I'm just not as excited about him because I think, Chaz will factor in, and just, they put so much on Allen's shoulders for the Mertz era that they can afford to kind of like back off a little bit and, not run him into the ground and continue. Like, he's playing through injuries all the time. Tough as nails kid, but it's really weird for me to see a 6-7 and not just immediately be like, that's the first guy in my lineup, because it's not. I mean, the passing game is going to be much better. It is a bit concerning, not to the degree of like, oh my God, Skylar Bell's he's washed or something. He's not in the starting at the top of the depth chart. It doesn't actually really mean anything in this particular offense. Bryson Green is getting the start there, the transfer. Pauling, who you mentioned, and of course DK. Skylar Bell on the second line, but not to fear. The Beats do think he's still going to get plenty of reps and plenty of snaps in this game. So might he be a little sneaky 4-2 option? Perhaps. Buffalo, yes, agree. They do have Booby Curry, who's a familiar name to us, but and a 3-5, might I add. But yeah, it's not a lot here. It's disappointing because the Macs they're in these just terrible matchups and we can't use them. The only good thing I guess maybe coming out of this is that people will have it in their head that wow, these teams are all bad. And then when they go to play each other and they just hammer each other and put up all the fantasy goodness, they'll be caught with their pants down, some of the casuals who aren't really accustomed to that thing. So that's the only real good thing about having these MAC teams getting smacked around here early on. All right, we got 4 games left, 2 each. Notre Dame, who just was on the slate there, the early slate, the FanDuel all day at the week 0, getting a relatively gimme game here against Tennessee State. Another one that I probably could have done without. There were some other games that DK opted to leave off that I would have probably been a little bit more happy about. I'm just, as much as I want to be able to jockey these FCS teams, it's just, I'm not playing Draylon Ellis, even though he's mid-price. I'm not really looking at their running backs. I'm not really looking at anyone from the Tennessee State side. And again, I ordinarily would try to maybe dig 1-2 names out there for those MMEers, but I'm not going to do that here because there's really no point. The Notre Dame side, we're in the, broken record here. We're looking at a blowout. We have a running back between 6'5" and 7'5", and Audric, Estime, who was really quite good last week. Didn't end up getting the work that we would have wanted because of, passing game ended up being really efficient. Score got really lopsided there. And that's going to be something that probably happens again here. So I'm probably not prioritizing Audric, although I do think he's going to score a touchdown, but at 7-2, there's just so many other options a little bit lower. We're kind of just, splitting hairs here. There's a lot of these early season situations where the blowouts, we're going to have to play the guessing game. You do have a cheaper running back like Gilbrand Payne at 4K, where if you want to play that game of getting the additional carries later in the game, that's somebody you can definitely look to. Quarterback, obviously, Sam Hartman looked really good. But at 9.7, we're paying a premium where he's not going to have to throw the ball. There will be times where he is a optimal or main team guy. You are very high on Hartman usually, but this is probably not the spot to do that. Merriweather, get him out of here. I don't know when he's going to transfer out of Notre Dame, but I would assume it'll be very, very soon if more neglect happens and he's out there. He's running the cardio, but my God, Jaden Greathouse was the guy that was just, reeling him in. 3 targets, 2 of them touchdowns. Hartman really zeroing in. That's what Hartman does, man. He'll pick a seemingly random receiver. He's got his main guy, but then he's like, I'm going to make this dude like the guy this week. And he'll do that. I feel like that was Greathouse. So I'm not going to be tempted to use him, but I do want to make people aware that that's something to be aware of. I think Jaden Thomas will end up being the dude here, and Hartman's, the apple of his eye. And I fully expect Merriweather to not stay on the team. I'm already seeing that chatter. And then, of course, you have Tyree, the converted wide receiver there. I don't know if there's going to be the carries available to him that I thought he might have, but he's okay at the 4.9 price. I'm really not looking to the Notre Dame group unless, again, we want to go with, maybe a Payne at 4K or a running back that we think is going to see time there in the second half. But otherwise, the hammer game, which I typically like to target, there's a couple other target games and one more we're going to talk about, but I'm not that interested in this Notre Dame game. And maybe that's a mistake. Is it something that you're looking to, or do you kind of feel the same?
Kind of the same. I mean, especially they already got their yayas out in week 0. And yep. I mean, there's just there's no reason to play starters a whole lot more than maybe a quarter and a half in a game like this. Everyone's into a rhythm already and got to hit some people and take the W and move on. And that's not great for fantasy. So.
Yeah, it's one they could have certainly left off. All right, moving right along. I think we end on 2 more marquee games, or at least, for me, this game is for the Washington side. But first, we're going to talk about the Ohio State Buckeyes, which is a team that's near and dear to you. You're my Buckeyes go-to guy. They're going up against the Indiana Hoosiers, who have some fantasy relevant players back on their team, and some really reasonable prices are kind of interesting for me on both sides of this game. What are you doing with your Buckeyes? And I say your Buckeyes affectionately. I know they're not your team to root for, but this is your team for DFS purposes.
Yeah, man. So, USC is always first in my heart, but spent enough time in Columbus, and so they became kind of a second team, and I guess that makes me a front runner if my two teams are SC and Ohio State. But so first thing to talk about, obviously, we have been blessed for so long with a lack of quarterback controversy at the Ohio State University, and we more or less have a little bit of one. So Kyle McCord is going to be the starter, but it's like one of those situations where Devin Brown is still going to see the field from time to time. And so how much, and let me just like cut to the chase. Don't play Kyle McCord because he's 9,900 and Bo Nix is going to play the whole game and he's $200 more. So if you ever get the thought to maybe kind of sort of play Kyle McCord, just play Bo Nix. That said, this is an interesting thing to watch because Devin Brown is probably the better fantasy quarterback. Kyle McCord may be better in terms of knowing the system and having the experience and sitting patiently behind CJ Stroud. But loyalty to the program doesn't translate to fantasy points. And if we do see Devin Brown overtake Kyle McCord at some point this season, I'm going to be extremely interested in him and how he does. Not enough to play him either, by the way. Like, I don't think he's going to play enough that at 8,500 he's a viable play. So kind of a bummer that like on the first Ohio State slate of the season, they have a conference game and you still can't even play him because we don't know how much each of the quarterbacks is going to play. And it's also, it's still like a blowout. It's still a 30-point spread, but it's at least not against the MAC team. Like, at least it's a real opponent. You can get into the running backs, and we have our ever so familiar 1A, 1B situation, except in this case, the 1A guy is a lot cheaper than the 1B guy, and I don't really understand that. I think there is, some brand name recognition with TreVeyon Henderson and some pedigree recognition with TreVeyon Henderson, but Mayan Williams, when both were healthy, Mayan Williams was getting more volume last year. And maybe part of that was TreVeyon was never 100% healthy. So maybe DK is saying, well, now that TreVeyon is healthy and he's had an offseason to recover, he's going to get 70% of the work, and Mayan Williams is going back to getting 30. I think it's a lot closer to 50-50 than that. And I think that they're both going to have plenty of opportunity to be successful. I think TreVeyon also has more game-breaking ability, is able to score from further out. He's going to get you 70-yard touchdowns, and Mayan Williams is going to get you 12-yard touchdowns. So there is some validity to the pricing being the way that it is. And I think that there's a lot more ownership than should go on to TreVeyon at that price. But I'm pretty interested in Mayan Williams. If TreVeyon becomes the 1A guy and takes that role back, then that means that we're going to get Mayan Williams in garbage time, and man, that's a freight train to try to stop, right? So I am pretty interested in Mayan Williams. I'm interested in both, but more so in Mayan. We also have Chip Trainum and Dallin Hayden. We saw each of them, and Chip Trainum I don't think was ever actually available on DraftKings because he played linebacker. last year and was only available as a running back in emergency. He has, I guess, agreed to play both or has switched back over to running back. I'm not quite sure how they're going to handle his usage, if they're going to truly make him a two-way player or not. We'll see how that plays out. But Dallin Hayden was extremely impressive when he got to carry the rock. He got, I don't recall if it was a start in practice, but he got 27 carries against Maryland last year and absolutely showed out. And so, if Ohio State does go up by 35 in the second quarter, we could see a lot of Dallin Hayden in the second half, and that's a pretty narrow play, but definitely something that could happen, the way that Ohio State's been able to put up points quickly in the past. And I think the defense is actually going to be pretty solid this year. More than that, Indiana doesn't really have quarterback, so it's going to be tough for them to keep up scoring points. And we haven't even gotten to the receivers on the Ohio State side yet, so let's do that. Obviously, Marvin Harrison is probably the most likely number one overall pick in next year's NFL draft. At least, at this point of the season, probably the most talented college football receiver that we've seen in a long time. And it's a little bit crazy to say that, because as recently as a couple years ago, he wasn't the most talented college football receiver in his own wide receiver group. That was, either JSN or Chris Olave or Jamison Williams or maybe Julian Fleming. People thought that about it at a certain point. And so Harrison has definitely, not that he had to make a name for himself because he comes from the pedigree, but is the best receiver in college football now. And at 9-1, you need 150 and 2 touchdowns probably. And so I don't know that he necessarily gets there, but he could also very easily get there. It's just you're pigeonholing yourself again into needing that ceiling performance from him in order to be relevant. And not going to say he's not going to do it, because you don't want to doubt a guy with that kind of talent. They just don't need him to do it to win this game. As much as I'd like to, I'm probably going to be under the field on Harrison and over the field on the running backs. And then the pecking order from there, Egbuka gets a lot of goal line work and is looked to in the red zone, or at least was by CJ Stroud. And so definitely the case, if not playing Harrison, there will be touchdowns through the air, and you could go to Egbuka for those. You can also go to Julian Fleming for some additional savings. He doesn't have the same explosiveness necessarily as Egbuka and Harrison, but is a possession receiver that can every now and then take the top off the defense. And then Xavier Johnson is somewhat of a gadget guy. Not a guy that I would expect to get a ton of volume, but at 4.2, kind of interesting nonetheless. Then we're getting into tight end Cade Stover, who is fine, but I wouldn't expect to see a lot of volume in a game like this. And after that, you're just playing, for blowout garbage time, probably not getting to a lot of volume for Brandon Ennis or Jaden Ballard, but they are extremely talented guys that at some point, Carnell Tate as well, at some point we're going to see them produce to the same level that we've seen Ohio State receivers produce. Just hard to know exactly how that will all shake out and how long the starters will be in there, with this being the first game of the season. So any of Harrison, Egbuka, and Fleming are great plays that could all work out, and also won't be on the field for more than 2.5 quarters, most likely. So just factor that into your analysis. Coming back on the Indiana side, Cam Camper has been kind of their high volume PPR. Definitely try to take his over receptions on PrizePicks number if it comes out. He also never seems to be quite healthy, and that's also the case for this game. And so we'll see how that plays out. DeQuise Carter, I'm not 100% sure I'm saying that correctly, but transfer that might see some volume as well for Indiana. And below that, it's getting pretty dicey in terms of guys that are going to see volume from a passing attack that I don't particularly love. The quarterback situation, just to touch on that a little bit on the Indiana side, I have as still unresolved. Do you have any clarity on that, Walt?
I mean, it looks like Taven Jackson.
Taven Jackson and Sorsby are who they're deciding between.
Yeah.
And
I think Jackson's got the expected lean, but it's still up in the air as far as I know.
Yeah, and so that's not great. Facing Ohio State in your first game, and it's Thursday night, and we don't know who the quarterback is. I'm probably not going to play either of those quarterbacks, but it also takes me off of any enthusiasm I might have for Cam Camper otherwise as a PPR god. It's going to be hard for him to reprise that role if we're not seeing consistent quarterback play, which I don't know that we're going to see out of the gate. And then running back, probably not. I'm probably not going running back against Ohio State either. So, I think it's Cam Camper or bust if we get word that he's 100% go and we trust that, whoever it is that ends up playing quarterback for Indiana can get him the ball. He would be a decent run back in a lineup where you are using Harrison or you are using Henderson or Myron Williams, I guess any of the Ohio State skill players, and you wanted some sort of run back, he would probably be it. But even then, I'm a little bit reluctant just because of the uncertainty at quarterback.
Yeah, and like you said, the health issues. He is the main option on Indiana for DFS purposes. Maybe Donovan McCulley will turn into like a Juice Williams type. He'll like punt, pass, and kick and do all the stuff that nobody else seems to be able to do for this team. This team should be better. But yeah, Camper is the only guy. The running backs for Ohio State, man, I feels like Trey maybe should be done at the collegiate level now. He's way too high price for me. I think you hit on that perfectly. Wide receivers, same thing. Julian Fleming, man, he's been around forever. Kind of almost feel like Fleming's like, yeah, he's this guy. He's next up. But it's like, nah, he's been there, he's been there for a long time. So still a reasonable price. I love Egbuka here, as I think most people are going to find the salary available to pay for Harrison. So I think he'll see some accelerated ownership there, which makes me like the Egbuka call even more. Red zone target, touchdown equity, all that good stuff, as you mentioned, and only 7.4, nearly 2K cheaper than Harrison. And Harrison will get that volume, but if Egbuka scores twice and Harrison doesn't, like he scores once or zero, you're going to make up a lot of that there. So I do like the Egbuka call there, and that's somebody I'm kind of looking at there for main lineups, just because I'm usually uncomfortable paying 9K or more for a receiver. I know it works, but it's just not my thing. It really is not my thing. All right. So, the quarterback situation is weird. The quarterback situation for Ohio State's like a no, but that might change as the season goes on. All right. Now, the last game on the slate to talk about is Boise State versus my UW Huskies. Of course, for me, one of the top quarterbacks on the slate has to be Michael Penix. Sitting there at 8.4, that price seems like a genuine slap in the face. And I know he was around like 7.9 to 8.2 a lot for most of the season, and he had some mid eights there. But at this point, we know how he's a master of this offense. If healthy, he's a very, very productive quarterback. Should be up over 9K. So to me, that 8.4 price point, even against a Boise State team that can get after it defensively, I'm not even worried about them in the least bit. So Penix is definitely a guy in his second season here that I think probably gets close to 5,000 passing yards this season. He was pretty close last year at 4,600, 31 touchdowns to 8 interceptions, scored a few rushing touchdowns here or there. But, man, he's just so fun to watch. And he was fun to watch prior to coming to the Huskies. When he was speaking of the Hoosiers, when he was in the Big Ten, we had some slates where he came through for us in a big way. So I've always been a big fan of his. At the running back spot for the Huskies, that's a question I've been getting a lot as a obvious fan of them. Cameron Davis, it wasn't even if Davis didn't get hurt and knocked out for the season, there was still going to be a ton of multiple ball carrier shared backfield. It wasn't as if Cam was going to come out and tote the rock 30 times. I do like Dylan Johnson, just like everybody else, 5'2". It's kind of the price that he usually lives at. Very good pass catching running back. He can be used in that regard. Newton has been there forever. Sam Adams is somebody I think as the season goes along to pay attention to, but not yet. I actually, out of all of them, minus the more popular and well-known Dylan Johnson, would be Daniel Nagata, who was at ASU for a time. Has some power to him. Also elusive, kind of that rare combination at times. At 4.5, I do like him in this spot. I think that he's going to get a little bit more carries than people realize. And the Huskies do play the hot potato game when it comes to carries at times. Nagata comes out there and knocks a couple of 5, 6, 7-yard runs. He may be getting that double-digit carry total that people don't foresee him coming into above a guy like Nixon, Newton, or Adams. So Nagata's the sneak play there if you're looking for one. And then at wide receiver, appropriately priced to a degree, Jalen McMillan at sub 7K. My man Rome Odunze at 7.3. We had Rome at the cheap price a lot last year. No secret, no surprise about those two. Now both over 100 targets, 110 for Rome, 118 for Jalen. Damn near 70% catch rate, just ridiculous receivers, both over 1,000 yards. Now I don't think we see both hit even though that offense is going to be super prolific and Penix is going to have that, 5,000 yard potential, I don't know that we see both of them hit 1,000 yards. I've been looking at a lot of different, team beat writer reports and coaching talk and all that. And it does seem like we're going to run the ball a little bit more. We're going to incorporate some things with those running backs. That's why they brought Dylan Johnson in. So expect him to catch, come in here and use his skills. And then also the tight end spots like, Devin Cole, Jack Westover, those type of guys will factor in. And then kind of the stash receiver for the back of your mind, Denzel Boston. Boston is getting a ton of hype. Now, guys like Bernard, Jackson, who's banged up right now, Polk, those are secondary receivers that people have had success with in GPPs, showdown, that kind of stuff. But Denzel Boston is the guy who's kind of the next waiting in the wings on deck, and he might pop sooner than we think. And his production is why I think we may see Jalen McMillan hit 750 yards as opposed to 1,000, or maybe Rome. I still think Rome's going to have a big season because he's that dude, but I think McMillan might be a little bit negatively affected by Boston. In the long run, that's going to be great for the team, not so good for DFS purposes. So watch out when you're using those guys, in your main lineup, and you might have some games where, McMillan underperforms a little bit, or maybe Rome doesn't score. You're going to have those games where the Huskies score 40 points and those guys maybe don't pay off those prices. So definitely not lock in loads and each and every slate like they were last year, especially with the elevated prices, but obviously still great plays across the board. It starts with Penix in your lineup, and then you can find a pairing partner from there. I don't mind the fact of a quarterback running back together in this situation. It wouldn't have been a good idea last year, but with Dylan Johnson on the team now, it is a very good idea because there are going to be a lot of connections between those two for sure. On the Boise State side, Talon Green, relatively cheap, subset 7K. He's certainly in play. I'm not finding myself there looking at this slate right now, the way it's kind of constructed. That price point with his dual threat upside is certainly intriguing. I think, around 20 fantasy points, probably a probability, but I don't see him necessarily putting up so much more than that. I do still like George Kalani. He's had some ups and downs similar to Hank Bachmeier, who we just saw, kind of lost the job, got the job back. Now he's back to being the alpha again, 6'8". In that price point, he's, there's a ton of viable, playable running backs, but he's not in a blowout situation. Could be in a possible close game, at least for a couple of quarters, where he's going to get a viable workload, 20 plus touches. So Holani at 6'8" is certainly in our player pool there, and possible borderline main team play. Doesn't really fit with the build of Penix, I know, but at college football, I just continue to lean on that as an excuse. Anything can go sometimes. And in the receiver room, it's not as alluring as it's been in the past. With Stephon Cobb's still there, Billy Bowens, Chase Perry is somebody at 4 or 5 that I have my eye on. couple of, Riley Smith and some other names there, but the receiver room with Taylor Green isn't really going to be that much of a fantasy gold mine for us with regularity. I think a lot of times when Boise's on the slate, we're either just going to play Helani or we're just going to run Taylor Green naked, which was pretty much what we did last year for the last month and a half to 2 months of the season when it came to Boise State. But absolutely love the Huskies, and there's some sneak now that they're known by the masses. They're no longer my late night sneak that nobody knows what's what on there. The pecking order's established, but Denzel Boston and perhaps Daniel Degada are still ways we can get a little bit of leverage here on a more popular Husky team. Weird to say that, but I think they will be more popular than we're accustomed to here this season. What do you think, man? You on the Husky train with me, or are you kind of backing off them this year?
No, I'm absolutely on the Penix thing. I mean, nobody throws for more volume. That's for certain. And he's got such an excellent, trio of receivers. Don't necessarily love the matchup with Boise State. Like, that's not a defense I'm like, oh yeah, let's go attack them. But I don't think it matters. I think he's too talented for that, and there's too much talent in the receiver room. I'm more concerned with it continuing to be a game for long enough that he has to keep the foot on the gas. And one thing with Taylor Green, like, he absolutely showed out at times, typically against, moderate to inferior opponents. When he was playing above his head, it was very apparent. He looked much more tentative. He didn't have all the same reads that, made him into a fantasy superstar, didn't take off right away. And my reluctancy to use him as a run back would be, man, what if he, starts to play scared in this one and doesn't have all those instincts. Playing at UW can probably be an intimidating place to play. And, he's no spry chicken, but it's a tough scenario and doesn't have the best supporting cast around him. So ordinarily I would be like, yes, give me Penix, give me Rome, give me McMillan, and give me Taylor Green running it back. If the game were in Boise, I would probably be a little bit more inclined to do that. I am probably more inclined to play more Dylan Johnson in this one, and yes, have the Penix and the receiver exposure, but maybe it turns into more of a Taylor Green has a lot of turnovers and Dylan Johnson gets a lot of, or even Nagata gets a lot of goal line work and red zone work, and lets the defense finish them off and do the rest. So it kind of it depends on how you see that game flowing. I see it tilting more towards UW blowout and less towards back and forth with lots of scoring. I don't think that Boise State is built to keep up with that kind of offense.
Yeah, especially not now with the makeup of their roster. All right, so that brings us to the end of the slate breakdown. It was a long one. We'll get 2-3 prize picks plays in a minute, and then we'll head out. But it's a huge one, so what's your? And I won't hold you to it. We'll talk again in the Discord. But what's your initial 3-man core on this giant slate?
Yeah, it's tough to get there, but I think I'm gonna go with Mordecai at quarterback.
Ooh, okay.
I'm gonna go with Ray Davis at running back, and give me a minute on wide receiver. Let's go with Egbuka at wide receiver.
Love it. So for me, I'm boring with the Penix core. I just can't get away from Quinshawn Judkins. I know there's blowout risk and everything else, but until he's at 8K, I just don't know how I can even get away from him. And then wide receiver, you got to give me my man Ramel Keaton. I appreciate you leaving him there for me because I know it probably crossed your mind. Let's get to prize picks. Give me 2 or 3 of your top prize picks, and then we'll head out of here.
Yeah. So they were pretty late with getting the PrizePicks numbers out for this slate. So I'll start with some ones that I have for tomorrow, and then I'll get back to you after you've given yours on some ones for Saturday. So it's pretty easy.
All right.
Hawaii is playing, and they're playing Stanford. So I'm going to take all of the passing overs I can find on the Hawaii side, and I'm going to take all the rushing overs I can find on the Stanford side. So what that has translated to so far was Stephen McBride over 58.5 receiving yards, and Braden Shager, who was a lot better than I think we expected him to be last week, over 265.5 passing yards against Stanford. And then I've got EJ Smith. I had it over 66. It's actually come down some to I think 62.5. But I mean, he can get that on a couple carries, so I'm not too worried about that early line movement. So over 66.5 for EJ. So that's for tomorrow. Let me take a brief look while you do yours, and I'll come up with some for Saturday.
Yeah, I'm surprised. That EJ Smith 62.5, that just seemed to me like an easy over. So that's, that's pretty odd. I think people are pushing that the wrong way. So I'm in agreement with you on that. I look at, you kind of talked up a little bit, not to agree on the Iowa, but the Caleb Johnson thing, like as I sit here and we're working through the slate, it just keeps on coming back to his price on the DFS side, but just feel like he's going to run for 100+ yards in this game. And just like, I don't know, he was so good last year on a kind of a crappy situation with, terrible quarterback play, at least adequate quarterback play at hand here, and a better receiving room. So I don't know I know it seems like a high number, but the Caleb Johnson over 86.5 rushing yards, that's one that I've been kind of sitting here thinking about Caleb Johnson, as odd as that sounds. And I feel pretty good about that one. I also liked I would have liked the Ramel Keaton number, but going over to the Vols here, Brew McCoy over 63.5. I think 75+ receiving yards is a pretty safe bet for him. So that is one that I'm going to be highly involved in. And then it's a game that's later on a different slate, but you got the South Carolina, the North Carolina thing. Are we to believe the Tar Heels defense is going to be some kind of super lockdown, unit? I don't believe it. Juice Wells, give me his receiving prop over 56.5 receiving yards. I think Juice Wells with a revitalized Spencer Rattler, not the level of Bo Nix. Like all the trash talk about Bo Nix, he comes to Oregon, he just goes nuclear. All the trash talking, people loved Spencer Rattler, then they didn't love him, and now it seems like he's going to be good again. And I'm looking at a pretty good season ahead for him at South Carolina, and having his WR1 Juice Wells at 56.5. That over is going to punish some people, so I like that one as well. Those are my three. What else did you have, or did you need a few more minutes?
So yeah, let me also just note here, highest rushing yard prop on the entire PrizePicks slate. Want to guess who it might be? Yeah, it's our boy Ray Davis.
Oh gosh,
95.5.
Oh, okay. I would have said Blake Corum.
I'll still take the over.
Damn,
I'm still
high.
taking the over on that. But
okay.
He's higher. PrizePicks has him as higher than Corum, higher than Edwards, higher than Caleb Johnson even. And yeah, I think I'm with you on the over 86.5 for Caleb Johnson. So it doesn't look like they have receptions out yet. I don't see that. Do you see that anywhere?
No, they'll be adding a lot more. That's kind of seems light right now.
That's usually my bread and butter is the receptions. So we'll try to go receiving yards instead. Another side of the same coin. And I think I'm gonna go. Let's see. I'm gonna go Jalen McMillan over 69.5. Did you do that too?
No, but I like that. I definitely like that.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll do that one as my third of ones for the Saturday slate. And then we'll of course be in the Discord as more come out.
Definitely, yeah, because this board, like looking at it, they're missing a lot, so there'll be more. Load up the tracker, and then of course, like you said, in Discord, you want to make sure you get on FTN daily. If you haven't already, use that code for the 10% off discount. There is a early bird special still going on for NFL, which does include college football, but you can also sign up for the all sports package, which gives you an even better value, and you get access to every single sport we offer, from golf to MLB, which Jay covers. There's FIBA going on. There's NFL, obviously, WNBA. Every single sport that you can bet on or play DFS on is available. Jake, let's get your final word, which is usually your version of the line in the sand play. I don't know if you had a chance to get one together, but take us home here.
Yeah, no, started out with it pretty early. I'm saying Ray Davis is going to be the man. I have a little bit better chance to get there. I went with Raleek Brown last week, and I think he saw 2 targets. So he didn't quite do it for us, but Ray Davis will have a little bit more volume than that. And I think we're going to go 150-3 for Ray Davis. And that's going to get him the top running back score on the slate due to the volume that he's going to be given.
I love it. That'll end this week's version of the CFB Super Show. Thanks everyone who tuned in. I'm Walt. That's Jake. We'll see you guys next week.